Fame often means forgetting the less fortunate. Watch how $1 from Snoop Dogg changed a homeless man's life, igniting a movement of kindness that shocked the nation. Don't miss this story of redemption and hope. Like, subscribe, and comment below to join the wave of change. A homeless man asks Snoop Dogg, "Can you give me $1?" Snoop's response is shocking. The city's heartbeat was relentless. Cars honked, pedestrians weaved through the streets, and the hum of conversations filled the air. On the corner of Jefferson Avenue and Martin Street in Seattle, Washington, a man sat slumped against the wall of an old bookstore. His clothes were worn, layers that barely kept the biting winter wind at bay. Beside him, a cardboard sign read, "Anything helps, God bless." His name was Harry, though most people didn't care to know it. At 42, he had been living on the streets for nearly a year, after a series of misfortunes stripped him of everything he once held dear. Each day was a gamble. Sometimes a passerby would toss a few coins his way, but more often they hurried past, avoiding his eyes. Harry adjusted his beanie and shivered as he watched shoes of every kind pass him by. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something different. A pair of pristine white sneakers stopped just feet away from him. They weren't just expensive. They were the kind only someone truly young and influential would wear. Harry glanced up. His curiosity piqued. Standing there was a man, tall and unmistakably composed, with his hands tucked casually into the pockets of a stylish jacket. Harry squinted against the sunlight. He recognized the face, but couldn't immediately place it. The man was waiting at the corner, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of the attention he was drawing. People around whispered, some even pulling out their phones discreetly to snap pictures. Harry hesitated. He wasn't one to approach anyone unless they made eye contact first, but something about the man's demeanor struck him. He wasn't in a rush like everyone else. There was an air of quiet observation, a calmness that seemed out of place amidst the city's chaos. Taking a breath, Harry spoke up, his voice dry from the cold. "Hey man, can you spare $1?" The man froze mid-scroll, his head tilting slightly as if to confirm he'd heard correctly. Slowly he turned to face Harry, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the world around them seemed to slow down. Harry braced himself for rejection, something he was used to, but what happened next was anything but ordinary. "What do you need it for?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. The question caught Harry off guard. It wasn't rude or dismissive, but there was a weight to it, as if the man genuinely wanted to know. Harry's throat tightened. He hadn't expected a conversation. "Well," he began, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." His voice faltered. There was something unsettling about being questioned, but there was no malice in the man's tone, just curiosity. The man stepped closer, his phone now forgotten in his pocket. Harry could feel the stares of others, the silent judgment of people wondering why someone like this man would waste his time on a man like him. Harry wanted to shrink away to avoid the embarrassment, but the man's gaze held him there. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Harry," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded slightly, his brow furrowing as if he were processing something far beyond the moment. "I'm Snoop," he said simply. There was no arrogance, no sense of self-importance in his introduction, just unexpected sincerity. The hum of the city returned, but something in that exchange was different. The air between them felt charged, as if this brief moment would lead to something far greater. Harry shifted uneasily on the cold pavement, unsure how to respond. Snoop's presence was unlike anything he had encountered before. Most people ignored him, averted their gaze, or tossed loose change in his direction without so much as a word. But here was this man, not just stopping but actually talking to him, as if he were an equal. Snoop crouched down to meet Harry at eye level, a move that startled Harry. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" Snoop asked, his tone calm but direct. Harry hesitated. Sharing his story wasn't something he usually did. People didn't care about the why, only the spectacle of his misfortune. But there was something disarming about Snoop's demeanor. "Almost a year now," Harry admitted. Lost my job after the factory shut down, then my health took a turn. Couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. It's been downhill ever since. Snoop listened intently, his eyes narrowing slightly, not out of judgment, but focus. It was a look Harry wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and concern, as if the rapper were piecing together a puzzle in his mind. Harry noticed the quiet tension growing among the crowd around them. People were watching, whispering. Some even paused, their curiosity piqued by the unusual sight of the famous rapper crouched on the sidewalk beside a homeless man. "What about family?" Snoop asked. Harry's jaw tightened and he shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore. My folks passed years ago, my sister. Well, we haven't talked in ages," he chuckled bitterly. "Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all." Snoop was quiet for a moment, as if weighing Harry's words carefully. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into his pocket. Harry's pulse quickened. He had asked for $1, just one, but Snoop's movements suggested something different. When his hand emerged, he wasn't holding a single bill, but a crisp $100 note. The sight made Harry blink in disbelief. "Here," Snoop said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than coffee." Harry stared at the money, stunned for a moment. He couldn't move. It wasn't just the amount, it was the gesture itself. "Are you serious?" Harry finally managed to ask, his voice cracking. "Why would you do that?" Snoop shrugged lightly. "Because I can." The simplicity of his answer left Harry speechless, but before he could respond, Snoop leaned in a little closer. "But listen," he added, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "This isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something." "What's that?" Harry asked, gripping the bill like it might vanish. Snoop's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "If I help you today, you've got to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" Harry felt a lump rise in his throat. The words hit harder than he expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just handing him a lifeline. They were challenging him to climb out of the hole he'd fallen into. Harry nodded, unable to find the right words. "Good," Snoop said, standing back up. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, his calm demeanor unshaken by the attention. Harry felt his cheeks burn as he noticed people recording the interaction on their phones. He wasn't sure how to feel, grateful, embarrassed, or both. Snoop reached into his pocket again, pulling out a pen and a small notepad, scribbling something quickly. He handed the torn piece of paper to Harry. "Go to this address tomorrow morning. They'll help you out. Tell them Snoop sent you." Harry unfolded the note, his hands trembling slightly. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center, one he'd heard of, but had always been too proud or too ashamed to visit. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Snoop added, his voice unwavering. The air around them seemed to shift as Harry clutched the paper and the money. It wasn't just kindness, it was hope, a fragile, flickering light in a world that had long been dark. And somehow Harry knew this was only the beginning. Harry sat there staring at the $100 bill and the note in his hands as if they were alien objects. His mind raced, caught between disbelief and cautious hope. Snoop didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood there, watching Harry with an intensity that felt almost unnerving. It was clear he wasn't just offering a handout. He was waiting for something, perhaps an acknowledgement or a commitment. Harry cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "Why? Why do you care? You don't know me." Snoop tilted his head slightly, his lips forming a faint smile. "Because everyone has a story, Harry. Yours just hasn't been told yet." He paused, glancing at the crowd beginning to gather. "And honestly, if I'm in a position to do something good, why wouldn't I?" Harry was taken aback. He'd heard plenty of empty words over the years, but Snoop's tone carried a weight that felt genuine. Still, skepticism gnawed at him. "You don't owe me anything," Harry said, his voice firmer now. "I've been out here long enough to know people don't just stop to help without expecting something in return." Snoop crouched down again, leveling his gaze with Harry's. "I don't expect anything, but I do believe that small actions can lead to something bigger." He gestured to the note in Harry's hand. "That place has got resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you might need. All I'm asking is that you show up." Harry swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. He glanced at the note again, the address scribbled in neat handwriting. He wanted to believe this was real, but years of disappointment had hardened him. And what if I can't do it? What if I screw it up? Snoop smiled faintly, shaking his head. Everyone screws up, Harry. But giving up? That's the only way you lose. His words were simple, but landed with a force Harry wasn't prepared for. For a moment, the noise of the city seemed to fade, and all he could hear was the quiet conviction in the rapper's voice. The crowd around them had grown thicker, and phones were now openly pointed in their direction. Someone murmured, "Is that Snoop Dogg?" Harry glanced nervously at the growing attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the weight of so many eyes on him felt suffocating. Snoop seemed unfazed. If anything, he seemed to thrive under the pressure, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Harry's unease. "Ignore them," Snoop said softly, as if reading Harry's mind. "This is about you and me right now. No one else matters." Harry felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. Someone saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll go. I'll show up." Snoop's expression softened, a genuine smile breaking through. "That's all I wanted to hear." He stood up, brushing off his knees and glancing at the crowd. "To Harry," he added, his voice louder now, as if speaking for everyone to hear. "You've got more strength in you than you realize. Don't forget that." Harry blinked, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply nodded, clutching the note tightly in his hand like a lifeline. As Snoop turned to leave, the crowd parted for him, their whispers growing louder. Harry watched him disappear into the city, his figure blending into the stream of people. For the first time in years, Harry felt a flicker of something he thought he'd lost. Hope. And as he looked at the note again, he realized this was the first step toward reclaiming his life. The next morning, Harry stood outside the address Snoop had given him. It was a modest brick building on a quieter side of Seattle, its entrance marked with a simple sign, Community Support Hub. A small stream of people filtered in and out, some carrying grocery bags, others looking as uncertain as Harry felt. He clutched the note in his pocket, his fingers tracing the edges, as if to remind himself this wasn't a dream. The $100 bill was still tucked safely in his jacket. Part of him wanted to save it, to hold on to the generosity as proof that yesterday had really happened. But another part, the part of him that Snoop's words had stirred, whispered that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the chance to start over. Taking a deep breath, Harry stepped inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him immediately, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile, looked up from her desk. "How can I help you today?" Harry hesitated before pulling out the note and sliding it across the counter. "A Snoop sent me. Said I should come here." Her eyes flicked to the paper, and a knowing smile spread across her face. "You must be Harry. We've been expecting you." She stood motioning for him to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours passed in a blur. Harry met with a caseworker who listened to his story without judgment, outlining a plan to get him back on his feet. They set him up with a temporary bed in their shelter, arranged for a doctor's appointment to address his health issues, and even connected him with a job training program. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in years, Harry felt like the pieces of his life were being picked up and carefully put back together. Later that evening, as he sat on the edge of his cot in the shelter, Harry replayed the events of the past 24 hours in his mind. The kindness of a stranger, the offer of help, the simple act of being seen. It all felt surreal. He thought about Snoop's words, about the promise he had made to help himself. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, Harry believed it was possible. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Snoop's gesture had begun to ripple far beyond what either of them could have imagined. A video of their interaction, taken by a bystander, had gone viral overnight. It spread across social media like wildfire, with headlines praising the rapper's unexpected act of generosity. The footage showed Snoop kneeling beside Harry, handing him the money, and speaking words of encouragement that had struck a chord with millions. Some called it a publicity stunt, while others argued it was a rare display of genuine compassion from someone in a position of privilege. Regardless of the debates, one thing was clear. The video had captured something raw and powerful. People from all walks of life began reaching out to the community support hub, offering donations and support inspired by Snoop's actions. Harry had no idea his story was now at the center of a national conversation. He was too busy focusing on the steps ahead, attending his first counseling session, filling out job applications, and learning to believe in himself again. As Harry lay down that night, the weight of the past year seemed a little lighter. Somewhere out there, the man who had stopped to help him was making waves, but Harry's focus was simple: take it one day at a time and honor the promise he'd made. By the end of the week, Harry began to notice subtle changes, both within himself and in the world around him. At the shelter, staff members treated him with a kindness he hadn't felt in years. They offered not just practical support, but also encouragement, reminding him that his story wasn't over yet. Word of his journey had spread quietly within the shelter community. Others who had been struggling in silence came up to him, inspired by his willingness to take the first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man had said, giving Harry a pat on the back. The gesture, simple as it was, filled Harry with an unfamiliar sense of pride. Outside the shelter, however, Harry's story was no longer quiet. The video of his interaction with Snoop Dogg had exploded across social media, racking up millions of views in just a few days. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting every detail. Commentators debated whether Snoop's actions were genuine or performative, while viewers around the country shared their thoughts online. "Privilege with a purpose," one tweet read. "This is how you use it for good," another user posted. "It's sad that kindness like this is so rare it shocks us, but kudos to Snoop for showing us it's possible." Harry learned about the attention when a staff member at the shelter showed him the video. Watching himself on screen, Harry felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name. He barely recognized the man in the video, the hollow eyes, the defeated posture. It was a reminder of how far he'd fallen and perhaps how far he could rise. Meanwhile, Snoop stayed silent about the growing buzz. He refused interviews, avoided public statements, and ignored the online noise. To him, this wasn't about basking in praise. It was about Harry. Behind the scenes, Snoop quietly ensured that the Community Support Hub received substantial donations, enough to expand its programs and help even more people like Harry. The video sparked a larger movement. People across the country began sharing their own acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like Your Kindness Challenge and Pay It Forward. Local organizations reported increases in donations, and volunteers stepped forward in droves, inspired by the simplicity of Snoop's gesture. For Harry, the ripple effect became more personal one evening, as he sat in the shelter's common room. He was approached by a woman who looked oddly familiar. "Harry," the woman asked hesitantly. Harry squinted, trying to place the face. Then it clicked. "Lisa," he said, his voice trembling. It was his younger sister, the one he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The two stared at each other, the weight of lost years hanging between them. "I saw the video," Lisa admitted, sitting down beside him. "I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Harry shook his head, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to find me." Lisa placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." The reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost, but also of what could still be rebuilt. For Harry, it was another step toward healing, not just his circumstances, but his relationships and his sense of self. As the weeks went on, Harry began to see his story less as a tragedy and more as a testament to resilience. And though he still had a long road ahead, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by the kindness of a stranger who had given him more than money. He had given him hope,